Welcome to Black History Matters 2022, presented by the National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum, also known as NAHOF, located in Peterborough, New York. Black History Matters is an educational series that seeks to highlight historical events in the Black American experience. This series consists of 28 videos that NAHOF will release daily through the month of February 2022. Videos are viewable on NAHOF's website. The mission of the National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum is to honor anti-slavery abolitionists, their work to end slavery, and the legacy of the struggle, and strive to complete the second and ongoing abolition, the moral conviction to end racism. This program was funded in part by Humanities New York with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, James Brewer Stewart. Dr. Stewart is the founder of Historians Against Slavery and James Wallace Professor of History Emeritus at Macalester College. He has published a dozen books on the history of the American anti-slavery movement, has appeared in several of the American Experiences historical documentaries, is co-editor for Louisiana University Press of a book series on abolition, anti-slavery, and the Atlantic world, is a consultant to the Celebrate American Heroes Project, and has spoken widely on college and university campuses on abolishing slavery in Lincoln's time and ours. Before beginning this presentation, I will dedicate 1 minute to showing you 4 pieces of art created by the artist Donald Walker, who Dr. Stewart will speak more about later in this presentation. I ask that you take the time by pausing the video and writing down what you notice in these art pieces, whether that be what they make you feel, what they remind you of, or any other detail that stands out to you. It is important that you register your initial observations to these images, as the purpose of this presentation will be to speak to the power of art as a medium to history and to the contemporary Black American experience.
Thank you, Victoria, for allowing me a chance to be able to have this conversation with you and to try and talk about something that's very new to me, but very exciting. And as a historian, something that's opened a tremendous number of doors for me that before have always been sort of shut or at least mysterious and hard to open. And that particular mechanism is what you're looking at on the screen right now. That is a piece of artwork done by a very talented African-American artist by the name of Donald Walker. Later on, I'll tell you the story about how Donald and I got together in the first place. But I've come to understand that really fine and honest and very forthright, even gut-punching, African-American artistic commentary on racial justice, on inequality, on white supremacy, is a window into a world not only of the present, but of the past and the relationship between the two. Thinking about the current problems that seem to be so overwhelming to us, no matter what our skin color is, that have to do with social injustice, racial inequality, and all that. So basically, the title of this, or the concept that lies behind this little talk, is the idea that artistry creates history. Sounds real good to just roll that off your tongue that way. But it seems to me that that's absolutely true. I've spent longer than most of you have been alive trying to communicate with the outside world about this history. Written lots of books. I've been on TV shows. I've done a bunch of advising and script writing and editing and appearing in PBS videos, all with the idea of trying to take this history, which is just huge, sits in libraries, takes up shelf after shelf after shelf, that tells us about the relationship between African-American history and American history. And it brings the two together and weaves them back and forth in a way that makes us have a great deal in common and a whole lot to share and a whole lot to learn. The trouble has always been during that long period of time that I've been doing this, that reaching the general public is very, very, very hard to do. um, eloquent films, wonderful pieces of music, terrific novels, and pieces of poetry have been coming out of the Black community forever. Basically, giving the white world and the nation in general a clear picture of what's wrong and what needs to be addressed. And you can't get any more eloquent than either Phyllis Wheatley, if you want to go way, way back, or Toni Morrison, if you want to come directly to the present, or if you want a poet, you can have Nikki Giovanni. If you want another poem, you can have Langston Hughes. Just think for a minute about how long and strong this message has been in Americans' cultural history for all this time, and never has been fundamentally responded to. Okay, so here I'm a white guy, and I'm a white guy who has been studying the history of white supremacy and African-American responses to it for all this period of time, and knowing that this history remains sort of hermetically sealed in the academic world and very hard to bring out to the bigger world. And then suddenly I find art that looks like this. Let me tell you some things about Donald Walker first. Donald's about 70 years old. He interned at the local newspaper here in the Twin Cities with Charles Schulz, the guy who invented peanuts. And they were illustrators together in editorial cartoons and things like that. So, and Donald has a big formal artistic education through the Minnesota College of Art and Design. He's worked for lots of different corporations doing everything from advertising to logos. He can decorate the walls of your office building with beautiful pieces of work that are all abstract and have nothing to do with what you see right here. I am blessed, I guess, is the best way to put it, to be in collaboration with a guy who's a real genius and a really good guy. Okay. Donald had a great big peak moment back in the mid-90s when Vidal Sassoon, the old designer who's now dead, but you know about Sassoon products, invited him to show all of his work in a big gallery on Rodeo Drive out in La La Land. And it was there that he met people like Oprah Winfrey. He sold his work to Michael Jordan, Coretta Scott King, the late Johnny Cochran. This was a guy who at one time had a huge reputation, but like every creative artist, unless you stay at it and keep pushing it, you fall out of the headlines and then people don't remember what it is and who you are. The reasons for that are not important here, but the important point to stress is that this is a comeback tour for Donald working with me. When I saw this image here, I was standing in a Black-owned coffee shop with the owner, who's a guy that I know. And Donald was somebody I didn't know at all. Donald had this big rectangle, big rectangle. This is a huge piece of work. It fills up half a wall. And he's got a big shroud over it. And he walks in while I'm talking to the owner. And so I ask Donald, without knowing him at all, what do you got under there? He pulls off the shroud, and I honestly, God, I'm telling you the total truth. 90 seconds later, I bought this thing for $1,500. And let me tell you what I did. The reason that I did is because if you're a historian, you understand and are deeply involved in very long-standing historical debates and discussions about the relationship between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. The Declaration of Independence, as you see in this picture, is being covered by the Constitution. It's sliding over. There are the founding fathers there. Here is the document that talks about equality, and it's being covered by the document that defines African descended people as 3/5 of a human being. The symbolism with the founding fathers right there behind it puts that African American figure in the moment. Not about now, but all about then. And All that you have to do is to center on him and then work your way backward. And you understand precisely how he feels about the relationship of American ideals to the actual system of law and constitutional government in the United States. Some people say a picture is worth 1,000 words. I think this picture is worth about 1,000 books. We write over and over and over again about whether it's an anti-slavery constitution or a pro-slavery constitution, what the relationship to the American Revolution was to slavery. There's been a big debate about all that called the 1619 Project, which has been in the headlines right now, right today. What we're getting here is the unfiltered African-American person, artist view of the relationship between past and present. And if you can look at the writing along the side there, all of that is Donald's explanation for how he felt when he composed this. Now, for me as a historian, I can teach from this thing. It doesn't teach itself. It needs to be put into a lot of different contexts, but mostly you have to ask in a session like the one that I'm talking about where artistry creates history. You have to ask other people what they see in this, how they respond to it, to be able to get the viewer's take on what Donald's trying to tell us, or what he's trying to get out of himself, whether he wants to tell us anything or not. This may be only his expression of how he feels. He doesn't care what we think. We don't know. So it's an open-ended set of questions about the art that really make it possible to start seeing the past. Now, this is really important and it's really hard to get right, to see the past the way that African-American people remember it. Short explanation. I'm not Black. I haven't lived that experience. I don't know what it would be like to walk out my front door and suddenly have to worry about how people are perceiving me if a cop car goes by. What I can understand out of this piece of artwork is a really talented Black guy's visceral understanding of what American history serves up to him. The point I'm trying to make really is related to this point, that African-American people and Native American people particularly are our best historians. That's because they have so much that they need to account for and remember in order to be able to get up in the morning and be human beings. If you know, in the year 2021, what happened to your Uncle Nate when white people destroyed the Black community of Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921. Your view of the world is very different if you didn't have that experience. But that's what this art is about. And there's a lot more of it than just this. I'm actually working with 4 artists, and they're all in their own way, just as compelling as what you see in front of you here. But the point is that African-American, historically minded people are people who have a lot to remember about what's happened to them. A lot of anger to work out, a lot of memory to keep, a lot of things to mourn about, a lot of traditions to try and keep alive in families. Have you ever noticed how much Native Americans and African Americans are given to storytelling? Those stories are the way that memory and history come together and give us our best window, I think, as people who don't happen to be sharing those colors of skin, what is going on in the minds of people who in every other way, because race is a myth, right? A good historian, a really wonderful historian at Columbia named Barbara Fields once got off a one-liner that's been in American history ever since, which goes like this. White supremacy is real and powerful, but if you believe in no, racism is alive and powerful, and if you believe in it, you're correct. Race, if you believe in it, you also believe in the tooth fairy. The point in all this is to one way or another to recognize that within this really battleground of history, we are really mostly more or less alike. And that the idea that we see each other as races is something to be gotten over by being able in one way or another to get into the mentality of people whose lives you can't experience because you haven't lived the way they have. It's through the art that takes you to the history, so you can do that. And so once you begin to see the Constitution obliterating the Declaration of Independence, you can begin to understand why it is that most Supreme Courts in the United States have made it their business to undercut civil rights legislation and the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments. You can begin to trace all that through the great exceptional period during the 1960s when the court was actually legislating equality. There's a whole large, big history of law and social conflict that is embedded in this particular picture. So when I'm teaching this picture, the next thing to do is to understand that this is not in any sense the totality of the story. Okay, here's Donald again. Now you can't see at the bottom here because it's just too faint to get there. The title of the subtitle of the last image you saw was The Constitution. The subtitle for this is We Own This. Now, I happen to, of all the stuff that Donald's done, I've happened to buy these two particular pieces of art, and they sit on opposite walls and they look at each other. Okay. And here is another set of statements. See, that's the map of the United States sitting there, looking very, very small. And the guy in the chair with the scruffy pants on, the afro, is seeming like he's almost a street trumpeter, taking the horn of his trumpet down into the United States. The caption is, We Own This. What does he mean by that? What do you think he means by that is really the question we should be asking. He says over here on the side, we built this country. We birthed its economy, blah, 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 on and on you go. It's time for us to have our rightful place. But on the other hand, it looks like the picture, at least seems, the painting seems to me to say that this guy is in his rightful place. He's the boss. He's running things. Now, how do you reconcile these two pictures? You see how complicated it all of a sudden gets? This is the same guy, same artist. And he's revealed another component of how he sees the place of African descended people historically in American life. We own this place, but his description on the side is all in the past tense. And it's the past tense that gets him into this eternal moment. This isn't a moment that's going to pass. He's got the whole of the country underneath him, and he's telling it what it needs to know. Now, there's a lot of ways that you can interpret a picture like this, but I like to interpret it in relation to another picture, the one that we just saw. How does such a harsh view of law go together with such a stridently confidential, confident view of African Americans' position in American culture? How do those two things fit together? Now, there's a huge set of statements and possibilities that lie between these two pictures. And if you want to think about it the way that a good historian would think about it, the point is not this picture says this and that picture says that to me. I mean, remember, we're just viewers. We can bring to this any interpretation we want. Donald doesn't care. He's said his piece, and you have to live with it, whatever it is. Like any good historian, when you read this book on this subject and that other book on this related subject, the meaning is in the invisible connection between the two of them. We have a big, sloppy academic term that describes this. It's called intertextuality, the conversation between the texts. Rather than just saying this piece of knowledge is over here and that other one is over here, the whole meaning comes together as your mind and your moral sense and a lot of your aesthetic sense, which is something you don't usually use in history, begin to come together to say, how does this artist tell us how he can think of these two different things in synchrony? Okay. Now I can go on and interpret this forever, and I'm not gonna. Okay. Because it seems to me that the real value in all this is remembering again the guy who is writing, who's developing these pictures, just like all the people who work in the tremendous poetry and literature and so forth and so on, made great films, Spike Lee, whatever. He is one way or another making a huge commentary on the present and the past that allows you to get inside how people who are not like you perceive their cultural position and history in the nation that we live in together. Okay. I hope I'm making this clear. There's a lot of moving parts to this sort of thing, but the way you teach this stuff, which I do, and there's a big project that goes on that I'll explain in a little while that involves this art, is to have people begin to develop their own meanings from it. What does he mean by we own this? And how does it relate to this other picture? What intertextuality do you see? The challenge is to try to get into the representation as a white person, because the artist is inviting you in. That's what these artists always do. The reason I can do this work in a way that Donald can't do this work is because I'm white. If he does it, it's received differently as another Black message that's full of anger, full of assertion, full of this, full of that, very contentious, over and over and over again, which is the way it's always been received, always with backlash. I do it and offer out these opportunities for people, and the engagement, the willingness to try, the willingness to step into the pictures yourself. It's amazing how easy it gets to be, and how you begin to own these works in your own way. So one frame has power and creativity. Creativity. What's this guy doing? What's coming out of his trumpet, do you think? It isn't taps. It isn't reveille. You imagine it sounds like Miles Davis, right? Once you begin to get far enough into it, or maybe Dizzy Gillespie, although the trumpet horn goes in the wrong direction. Point is, suddenly I've invited you to see this guy in terms of musical culture that you already know a lot about. Okay. So we've been going here now for about how long? I'm trying to keep track of time because we're strictly limited on what we can do. And so I want to move on to the next. The next two pictures are also paired. Okay. Never Again. Emmett Till, 1955 to 2021. Who knows about Emmett Till? Well, if you don't know, this is a good way to find out about one of the most horrifying moments in the history of race violence that was documented all over the country. I'm not going to tell you the story, but I am going to say that Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy. And by the time his body was put in an open casket with his face disfigured and destroyed, with his mother wanting the open casket so that newspaper photographers would take pictures of it and send it all over the country to be able to document the atrocity. You can see in the background George Floyd and other people. Donald doesn't put anything into a painting that he hasn't really thought a lot about. He's a perfectionist. It takes him a long time to do his work. And what's important here is to see, remember the angry, angry, angry face we saw in the first photograph? Look at the face of this Black kid. What's going through his mind? One of Donald's real deep gifts is to be able to register in faces tremendous amounts of meaning that you have to withdraw from that face. Okay, what's this kid thinking? He looks like he's a 14-year-old too. And he's reading the history for the first time. And he's not going to forget it. And at the same time, the newspaper is saying, never again. And then underneath, me too. What's that about? That has everything to do with gender and sexuality. It's a Me Too movement. And if you look around in various other places, and you get down here in the corner, you see Black Lives Matter. You see other victims of police killings. And you have another face of another Black teenager reading a book of some kind or another. Once you begin to get into the details of what's there and try and put it together as a composition, there's a tremendous amount to talk about if you're living in Minneapolis in 2021 and are in the midst of George Floyd. That's when this painting was done. And the echo between past and present in the middle of all that, once you remember that that's what happened, and we've been having police murders ever since then. We've had 3 since George Floyd. And you have Ahmaud Arbery, whose death, being the jogger going through the white community, it's all a question of, from a white supremacist point of view, being in the wrong place, right? Emmett Till, 14 years old, was interpreted as making a saucy gesture towards a white woman, for which he was absolutely dismembered. Ahmaud Arbery runs through a neighborhood. He's matter out of place, and he gets destroyed. This is another way of understanding African American history and African American memory. 1955 to 2021, 2021 is as important a date to remember as 1955, but you see how the linkage goes. So the point here, unlike the other two, okay, is much more personal. The other two are big, broad form statements about the whole nation, okay? This is maybe a kid who's trying to contemplate his future. Of course he is. What's the expression on his face? You can't tell. The only thing that I see in it is intensity and a likelihood that he knows what he's reading. Seems very engaged, doesn't it? So here we go. Let's remember now, this is small scale, right? The next one. This will be the last one we see. Look at where Emmett Till goes once another part of Donald's brain gets opened up. It's again about African American victimization. But all of a sudden, it's African American kids doing it to each other. This is a very, very hard thing to paint about. In the back, SOS, save our children. If you put this thing that you're looking at now next to Emmett Till, the intertextuality of it is just frightening. It just is. You can see how the two explain each other, if you want to. Point is, you are the person responding. Here are kids looking happy and fulfilled and ready to rumble. They're not thinking about things the way that other young African American kid reading the newspaper was. How do you square the two, the one with the other? It's a provocation. It's a giant provocation, which is all in the present tense. Everything we've seen so far has been in the past tense. And now this is in the present tense. Now, if we put all 4 of these things in a room and we all sit down together and start talking about then and now and how it fits together and literally how we feel about it. I mean, the idea of looking at art like this is not to do some sort of rational dissecting of different forms of technique or anything else like that, or style or anything else. This is designed to hit you in the gut and make you say, oof, and then say something after that. And the way that a historian will take Emmett Till and put Emmett Till together with what you see on this page, Save the Children, will take you way, way back to Tulsa in 1921, to forms of urban violence that began in the South during Reconstruction, and white violence in the countryside, and the necessity of Black people back then to arm themselves. And nobody had stricter anti-gun legislation than Georgia did back in the 19th and 20th century to keep firearms out of the hands of Black people. The whole question of firearms and being armed is something that is just so volatile and big and provocative. What happens when all those World War I soldiers come home into Black neighborhoods where they fought for democracy and now they're segregated? The year they get home, there are invasions of Black communities, 27 of them, all of the United States. It's called the Red Summer of 1919. Or, we can go on, and then see the reverse images if you want to start looking at what happened in the explosions after the assassination of Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy. Can you see how the art begins to pull you into memories that you wouldn't otherwise think of and link them historically together? So that's just a little taste of how that works. And I'm going to stop now because Victoria probably has some other thoughts on her mind, and she's an important person with good thoughts. So your turn.
Can you talk a bit about AHA and how it helps create the bridge between activists, artists, and the community at large?
Oh boy, okay. Notice I have to clear my throat and sort of bang my head and clarify my thoughts. I'm involved in something that still, to me, it's unbelievable that I actually am involved in. I've been looking for ways all my life to try and get rid of this barrier between historical knowledge and social justice and injustice. And I think, honest to God, I'm in one now. And what it involves is an organization which I founded, it's my idea, which is entitled Artistry, Honesty, Healing, and Action. Put the acronym together, it's AHA, and it's got an exclamation point at the end. The idea is that through artistry, you have an honest discussion about past and present through the art that gets us to being able to make contact in a confident way with the history that shaped this moment. We don't feel guilty about it, we're talking about art. I'm not talking about how squeamish we feel about one thing or another. The whole idea of implicit bias and white fragility and all that is banished from this conversation. You just can't do it that way because it won't work. The honesty is about that. The healing is the fact that these conversations are taking place between Black artists and white viewers of their art in a monster art show, which is going to open in a $30 million facility called an art center, which is located in one of the richest suburbs outside of St. Paul, Minnesota. It's called White Bear Lake, because Minnesota is a place with lots of lakes in it. This is a community built around the lake. It's gorgeous, it's fantastic, and the median price of houses out there is about $900,000. Full of successful people, full of talent. They've organized themselves into one big group of 30 different organizations, which includes the Chamber of Commerce, which includes the Teachers Union, which includes Rotary Club, which on and on and on, with the idea of trying to develop a sense of how to make their community welcoming and anti-racist. I've known about that for a long time. Some videos that I've done were used out there, and I went out and lectured about these videos, which we can talk about a little bit more later. Some of you have seen them already, which are explanations of the history of white supremacy after emancipation out of the 1930s and 40s. The point is that this big thing is sitting out there trying to educate itself. Okay, I go out, and as part of it's trying to educate itself, they learn about me. In the meantime, Donald Walker sells me his piece of art. And I begin to understand that when I show that art, this piece of art, just on my phone, to somebody in White Bear Lake, they say, "My God, what is that? I want to find out more about this." So AHA right now is a huge coalition of suburban privileged white people and the Black artistic community of St. Paul and Minneapolis. We have 4 of us of them, and they're all just kick-ass artists, and they range in age from 22 to 70. Donald's the oldest. They don't only just do art, they do cuisine, they do dance, they do theater, they do all kinds of stuff to surround this art show that we're putting on, which is all about discussion, not just looking at the pictures and saying that's interesting, but having to go back and forth with the artist to talk about what it's about, with the idea then of being able to figure out how to bring the wealth, the resources, the privilege of the suburbs into the city. The Art Institute is on one end. On the other end is an African-American coffee shop by the name of Golden Time, which is located in a Black neighborhood. It's a perfect art gallery. We're showing and doing this kind of talking in both places, making this bridge back and forth, with a clear expectation that as we move along, we're trying to find collaborations and solutions that can make this bridge between way out there and way in here. It's taken us a long time to get our art show together. We open on April 16th and we don't close until June 15th. And by the time we're in and out of there, there will be close to 30,000 people on various mailing lists, amplified by art teachers in high schools that are going to bring their kids around for workshops on their own designing of anti-racist images. It's a big, big program that's designed to get over all of the hesitancy, all the doubt, all the guilt, all the feelings of self-protection that go into the business of making it feel icky to talk about white supremacy, if you like, and how you feel about Black people. So that's what it's all about, really. We are in the midst of building our website right now. We're pulling together all of the advertising that we want to put together into the promotion for the art show itself. The show and the planning behind it and the execution of it is all going to become fodder for a documentary on us, which then makes it possible for us to use this as a model for other communities to use. There's another community that I know about right now that's way on the far beginning end of where we're going right now, who wants to do the same thing around reading groups having to do with African-American poets. You don't have to do it with visual arts. You can do it with words. You can do it with a lot of different things. And so we're becoming advisors to this infant organization that's trying to replicate AHA using a different medium. So that's what it is. We have basically 4 artists. We have 1 crazy historian. I give lectures based out of the art. That's what I've been trying to suggest I'm doing here. What I'm going to do is take individual and not individual, but clumps of pieces and pull them off the wall, take them into a seminar room, set them up, and we're going to do it in a big, much deeper way. Some of the stuff I was illustrating just on the surface of what can be done with it, and the discussion we were having, or the explanation I was giving just a minute ago. So there's that, and at the same time, we are wired to some of the smartest and most connected white people that you could ever want to think about, who've been trying on their own to get over the same hump that I've been trying to get over, but from a different position.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart, for your contribution of this presentation. If you're interested in learning more about the AHA program and the upcoming exhibition, please fill out the survey form linked in the video description and also on your screen, and include a comment that you are interested in being contacted about the art exhibits so that we may contact you when the website is available and there are more details about the location of the actual exhibition. This survey will also allow you to provide feedback on the presentation itself, and your feedback will help NAHOF receive funding and help plan future projects. Additionally, please contact NAHOF with any questions and if you're interested in learning more about the organization and its work. Once again, thank you, Dr. Stewart, for donating your time and contributing to this program, and thank you, the audience, for joining us on this educational journey, Black History Matters. We hope to see you at our next presentation.